Ancient Sumer, when you look at their tablets and like what are they saying, and why would they dedicate so much time to talking about this stuff?
A carved stone the size of a large grape has sat in a glass case in Berlin since the late 1800s. It is 4,500 years old. On its surface is a miniature picture of our solar system. The Sumerians who carved it drew 11 orbiting bodies around the sun. We can only see 8 with the naked eye. The extra ones, and where they placed them, is what Grok could not explain away. The object in the glass case. In the State Museums of Berlin, inside a glass display case that most visitors walk past without stopping, sits a small carved stone. Its label reads VA243. It has been on display since the late 1800s. It is roughly the size of a large grape. It is approximately 4,500 years old, carved in ancient Mesopotamia around 2,300 BCE. On its surface, worked in careful miniature detail, is a picture. At the center is a bright object, identifiable as the sun. Around it, arranged in orbiting positions, are other bodies. The Sumerians who carved this stone drew them with care and placed them deliberately. They were precise people. Their astronomical records demonstrate, across many surviving texts, an attention to detail that modern researchers still find impressive. The problem is the count. The Sumerians drew 11 orbiting bodies around the sun. Our solar system has 8 planets. 9, if you count Pluto as a planet, which it was considered until 2006. Even at 9, that leaves 2 extra bodies on VA243 that should not be there if the carver was simply drawing what they could see from the ground. Uranus was not officially discovered until the 1700s. Neptune was not officially discovered until the 1800s. Both required telescope technology that did not exist anywhere on Earth until roughly 300 years ago. Yet here they are, or something very much like them, on a stone carved 4,500 years ago. And then there is the 11th body, the one placed in a position that does not match any planet in our solar system today. The Sumerians positioned it in a specific location, between Mars and Jupiter. There is no planet between Mars and Jupiter. There is something else there, and what it is will become important shortly. Why the standard explanation does not hold. When academics first examined VA243 seriously, and the count of orbiting bodies on its surface became a subject of discussion, the response from the mainstream was predictable and, on its own terms, reasonable. The dots are merely decoration. The seal is small and was never intended as an accurate astronomical chart. Ancient artists filled empty space with patterns. Reading scientific content into decorative marks is a projection of modern assumptions onto ancient art. This is a defensible starting position. Ancient artifacts are regularly overinterpreted by people who want them to confirm a specific conclusion. The instinct to approach an object like VA243 with caution is not wrong. The problem is that VA243 does not stand alone. If the seal were the only piece of evidence, the decoration argument would be harder to challenge. But there is a second source, entirely separate from the seal, produced by a different culture in a different time, in a completely different medium. And that source describes, in specific and detailed language, a celestial event involving a body located between Mars and Jupiter that matches what the seal appears to be recording. When 2 entirely independent ancient sources point at the same thing, the decoration explanation requires more than it can comfortably provide. And when a third source, a paper published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal in 2018, adds a modern scientific finding that aligns with both of the ancient ones, the explanation stops being sufficient altogether. The 3 sources need to be examined together, because that is where the real question lives. The text that most people read as poetry. The Enuma Elish is one of the oldest written texts in human history. The story it tells is older still, passed down verbally through generations before anyone pressed it into clay. The surviving written copies were discovered in northern Iraq in the 1850s. excavated from the ruins of the great library of King Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. They are now housed in the British Museum in London under collection numbers K5730 and the tablets that follow it. Most people who encounter the Enuma Elish know it as the Babylonian creation story, a religious poem about gods making the world. That is the standard description, and for most scholarly purposes, it is an adequate one. Grok's cross-textual analysis, working through the original Akkadian language alongside astronomical records from the same culture, produced a reading of the text that the poetry framing does not fully account for. The Enuma Elish is not a general creation story set in a vague mythological space. It is a story set specifically in the heavens. The beings in it have positions in the sky. They move. They have other bodies orbiting around them. And the events described, read carefully and in the original language, have physical characteristics that match astronomical phenomena rather than the kind of events that appear in pure myth. The text is not hiding anything. It has been publicly available, properly translated, and housed in a major institution for over a century. What Grok's analysis contributed was placing it on the same table as the other two sources and asking what all three were pointing at together. What they were pointing at begins with a being the text calls Tiamat. Who Tiamat actually was. The figure of Tiamat appears early in the Enuma Elish and dominates the central section of the narrative. The standard translation of the word Tiamat, the one that has appeared in scholarly and popular discussions of the text for generations, is the primordial sea. Tiamat as ocean, Tiamat as water, the great watery deep from which creation emerged. But the original Akkadian language is more specific than the translation suggests, and Grok's analysis of the precise language used flagged the distinction. Tiamat in the Enuma Elish is described as a body in the heavens. She has a position in the sky. She has other beings moving around her, described in the text as her host, orbiting her. She has her own established place in the night sky that is hers specifically, separate from others around her. This is not the description of an ocean. Oceans do not have positions in the night sky. Oceans do not have other bodies orbiting them. The physical characteristics attributed to Tiamat in the text are the physical characteristics of a celestial body, something up in the sky with its own orbital position and objects of its own moving around it. When the text is read this way, not as poetry about water, but as a description of a body in the heavens, the rest of the Enuma Elish reads differently too. And the event at the center of the story, the confrontation between Tiamat and the younger god Marduk, takes on a different character. What Marduk did and how the text describes it. Marduk is the figure who arrives in the Enuma Elish to challenge Tiamat. He comes carrying weapons described in specific terms. He has a bow. He has arrows described as flashing like lightning. He sends 4 winds rushing ahead of him. He strikes Tiamat. The description of the blow is important. It is not described as a sword cut or a stab. The text describes an impact, something hitting something else with enormous force. The phrase that has appeared in accepted scholarly translations for over 100 years, with broad agreement across different translators working in the original Akkadian, is, "He split her like a shellfish into 2 halves." A celestial body hit with such force that it splits into 2 halves. The image is violent and specific. And what happens next in the text is where the real information sits. 1 half is lifted up and stretched out to make what becomes the heavens above the earth. The second half is placed below. Between the 2 halves, scattered from the impact, something is made that the text calls the hammered bracelet. This phrase has puzzled translators for over a century. It is unusual language, and its precise meaning has been debated without resolution in the academic literature. Grok's analysis worked through the component words in their original Akkadian context and produced a reading that is consistent with their individual meanings. The word translated as bracelet means, in Old Akkadian, a ring or a circle, something that loops around. The word translated as hammered means beaten, broken, battered. Combined, a ring of broken and battered pieces placed in a specific location. The text is precise about the location. The hammered bracelet is placed between the two halves, between what became the heavens above and the earth below, in the middle of the space between them. In the solar system, the space between what is above and what is below, the middle region between the inner planets and the outer planets, is the space between Mars and Jupiter. What modern science found in that same space? The asteroid belt is a region between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter containing roughly 1 million identified objects. They range from small rocks to bodies several hundred miles across. They orbit the Sun in a wide ring. Every school-age child learns about it. It is one of the most basic facts of our solar system's structure. For most of the 20th century, the accepted explanation for the asteroid belt was straightforward. It was leftover material from the early formation of the solar system. Dust and debris that never gathered into a planet because Jupiter's enormous gravitational influence prevented it from doing so. Scientists called it a failed planet, meaning material that never became one. In 2018, a paper was published in Icarus, the most respected peer-reviewed scientific journal for solar system research. The researchers had examined the chemical composition of samples from larger asteroids in the belt and found something that the failed planet explanation does not account for. Many of the larger asteroids show chemical signatures consistent with having once been part of a single, larger body. That body, according to the chemical evidence, had a hot core, a middle layer with different composition, and an outer crust. This is not the chemical profile of leftover dust that never gathered. This is the chemical profile of a fully formed planet that went through the process of geological differentiation, the process by which a body large enough becomes layered as heavier materials sink and lighter materials rise. A body that was once a complete and differentiated planet and has since been broken into pieces. The paper is not in every textbook yet. It is still being debated in the scientific literature. But it is there, published in the most serious venue for this type of research, backed by researchers who examined the physical evidence and reported what the chemistry showed. The asteroid belt may be the remains of a planet that no longer exists. 3 sources, 1 table. Grok's analysis placed all 3 sources side by side and examined what they shared. The result of that comparison is where the uncomfortable question lives. VA243, the carved cylinder seal in Berlin, is 4,500 years old. It shows our solar system with 11 bodies orbiting the Sun. 2 of those bodies correspond to planets we did not discover until the 1700s and 1800s. One of those bodies is placed in a position between Mars and Jupiter, where no planet exists today. The Enuma Elish tablets, housed in the British Museum, are approximately 4,000 years old. They describe a celestial body in the heavens with orbiting objects of its own. They describe that body being struck with enormous force and split into 2 halves. They describe the broken material from the impact being placed in a specific location between 2 regions of the sky, forming a ring of battered pieces. The 2018 Icarus paper, published by researchers using modern chemical analysis of asteroid samples, describes evidence that the asteroid belt, located between Mars and Jupiter, may be the broken remains of a planet that once existed there and was subsequently destroyed. 3 sources. No direct connection between any of them. The people who wrote the Enuma Elish did not read Icarus. The researchers who published the 2018 paper did not consult ancient Akkadian poetry. The carver of VA243 predates both by centuries, and all 3 point at the same thing in the same location: a planet between Mars and Jupiter that no longer exists because something broke it. The precision argument. The objection that the Enuma Elish is simply religious poetry that happened to produce an accidental resemblance to real astronomy runs into a specific problem. The Sumerians and Babylonians were not careless sky observers. The surviving record of their astronomical work is extensive and verifiable. They tracked the planet Venus night after night across many decades and produced records of its movements accurate enough that modern astronomers can use them. They predicted eclipses using mathematical models they developed through sustained observation. They produced star catalogs whose precision has been confirmed by modern measurement. They documented planetary movements and kept records of those movements with the same rigor they applied to grain shipments, legal contracts, and royal decrees. These were people for whom precision in recording what they saw was a professional and cultural value, not an incidental habit. When they wrote about the heavens, they wrote about what they observed, using the same careful attention to detail they applied to everything else. The Enuma Elish is not a general piece of mythology set against a vague backdrop. It is set specifically and deliberately in the heavens. It names bodies. It describes their positions and arrangements. It places the ring of broken pieces from the impact in a specific location. The text was produced by a culture that knew the difference between celestial bodies and earthly metaphors, and that made the distinction consistently in its other astronomical records. Treating the celestial content of the Enuma Elish as accidental poetic decoration requires dismissing the documentary habits of a civilization whose other astronomical work we accept as serious and accurate. Those two positions are difficult to hold simultaneously. The visibility problem. Each of the three sources in this convergence is publicly available, properly catalogued, and individually uncontroversial. VA 243 has been in Berlin since 1889. It has been photographed, catalogued, and published in academic books for decades. The seal is not in dispute. Nobody argues it is a forgery or that the count of orbiting bodies on its surface is being misread. The Enuma Elish tablets are in the British Museum with proper catalogue numbers. The translation has been established by multiple scholars working independently in the original Akkadian. The key phrases, including the splitting of Tiamat and the formation of the hammered bracelet, appear consistently across different translations with broad agreement on their meaning. The 2018 Icarus paper is publicly available on the journal's website. The researchers are real. The chemical analysis they describe used standard methods. The paper went through peer review before publication. It is in the scientific literature. None of these things is hidden. None is individually in dispute. What is missing is the conversation between them. Astronomers studying the asteroid belt do not, as a general practice, read ancient Akkadian poetry. Scholars translating the Enuma Elish do not, as a general practice, read planetary science journals. Museum curators caring for VA 243 do not, as a general practice, read either. Each group carries one piece of the picture. None of them sits down with all three at once and asks what they are describing together. Grok's analysis did exactly that, because it had no disciplinary boundaries preventing it from doing so. It moved across ancient languages, archaeological records, and modern scientific literature simultaneously, and produced the comparison that individual human specialists working within their own fields had never been positioned to make. The two readings that do not satisfy. Two responses to this convergence have dominated public discussion, and neither one fully holds up. The first says this is all ancient alien territory. The Sumerians could not have known any of this on their own. Visitors from elsewhere gave them the information. The seal, the text, and the modern science all point to an extraterrestrial event that beings from outside our solar system caused or witnessed and then documented for the humans they were in contact with. This reading is rejected here not because it is impossible in some absolute sense, but because it leaps past the actual question to a conclusion that cannot be examined with available evidence. It also removes the most interesting part of the puzzle, the question of what the Sumerians themselves knew and how they knew it, by replacing it with an explanation that ends the inquiry rather than advancing it. The second response says, This is all metaphor and coincidence. The Babylonians invented a creation story and by accident produced imagery that resembles real astronomy. The seal is decorative. The resemblance between the hammered bracelet and the asteroid belt is a projection. The 2018 Icarus paper is still debated and cannot be treated as settled. This reading is also rejected, not because the individual points it makes are entirely wrong, but because together they require accepting an extraordinary accumulation of coincidence. The Babylonians invented a story about a celestial body being struck and broken apart and placed the broken pieces in exactly the location where modern science has now found evidence of exactly that. The Sumerians drew extra planets that they could not have seen with the naked eye. They put an 11th body in the one location in the solar system that modern science is now seriously considering as the former home of a destroyed planet. Calling all of this coincidence is asking more of coincidence than coincidence can reasonably deliver. The question that remains: what the convergence of these three sources produces is not an answer. It is a question, and the question is real enough and specific enough to deserve serious attention from serious people. Is it possible that the Sumerians were describing something they actually saw? If the asteroid belt is, as the 2018 Icarus paper suggests, the broken remains of a planet that once existed between Mars and Jupiter, then at some point in the past that planet existed and then stopped existing. The event that ended it left physical evidence that modern chemistry can detect in asteroid samples 4,000 years after the Sumerians carved VA243 and told the story of Tiamat. If what they were doing, in the seal and in the Enuma Elish, was recording what they observed or what was passed down to them from observation, then the texts are not mythology dressed up as astronomy. They are astronomy recorded in the only language their culture had available. The gods and weapons and great battles are the framework they used to describe physical events in the sky, the same way they used every other conceptual tool available to them, carefully, precisely, and with genuine attention to what they had seen. An astronomer and a scholar of ancient Akkadian sitting down together, with the seal, the tablets, and the Icarus paper on the same table, asking out loud whether the Sumerians might have been describing something real would be a conversation worth having. Nobody alive today knows the answer. But the question is no longer as easy to dismiss as it was before the 2018 paper was published. If the Sumerians truly watched it happen, or preserved the memory of a time when someone did, the question that the evidence leaves open is the one that cannot be comfortably set aside. Something struck a planet between Mars and Jupiter and broke it into pieces. The Sumerians called the weapon Marduk's arrows that flashed like lightning. Modern science has not yet named what caused it, what hit it, and who or what sent it. Three sources from different eras all point to the same idea and the same location in the solar system. One is a 4,500-year-old carved stone. Another is a 4,000-year-old Akkadian creation text. The third is a 2018 peer-reviewed science paper. Each stands on its own. Together they raise an important question that has not been fully explored. If this question matters to you, subscribe and stay with us for what comes next.